Someone has to stay home with the dog. My father laughed when he said it. The same morning he handed my sister an 18-day luxury cruise itinerary and slid me a $25 grocery card across the kitchen table. He'd been doing this my whole life, not just vacations. Money, choices, milestones, always to her, always with an explanation that made it sound fair. My godfather sat at that table. I watched his brow furrow slowly, the way someone's face changes when they finally see what you've been carrying for years. I didn't say a word. I folded that grocery card and put it in my pocket like it was nothing. What my father didn't know was that I had spent 14 months building one binding document with my godfather, and while they were still at sea, I had already changed the locks. They came home to me standing on their porch with a lawyer. My father yelled for the police. He stopped the moment he read the first line and the color left his face. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to the night my godfather looked at me across that table and said, "How long has this been going on? It's not a punishment, Alina. It's a contribution." My father didn't look up from his coffee when he said it. He didn't have to. The authority in our house didn't come from eye contact. It came from the checkbook he kept in his breast pocket like a second heart. He slid the $25 grocery card across the oak table. It bumped against my empty plate and stayed there, a thin piece of blue plastic that was supposed to cover 18 days of my life. Across from me, my sister Chloe was vibrating. She was 24, 2 years younger than me, but she lived in a world of soft edges and high thread counts that I wasn't allowed to touch. She was holding the cruise itinerary like it was a holy relic. 18 days, she whispered, her eyes tracking the ports of call. Barcelona, Rome. I can finally use that linen wrap dress from the boutique. You've worked hard, honey, my father said, his voice dropping into that warm, indulgent tone he reserved only for her. Your mental health has been through the ringer this year. You need the sun, you need to be taken care of. I looked at the $25 card. Then I looked at the dog, Barnaby, who was resting his chin on my foot under the table. Barnaby was a 60-pound golden retriever with a heart murmur and a need for expensive prescription kibble that cost $80 a bag. Dad, I said, my voice flat, the dog food alone is more than this card, and the electric bill is due on the 15th. My father finally looked at me. His face transitioned instantly from warmth to a practiced, weary disappointment. This was the family law. Chloe was the fragile flower who needed the greenhouse, and I was the soil. I was the dependable one, and in this house, being dependable was a life sentence. We've discussed this, Alina, he said, setting his mug down with a controlled click. Money is tight. I'm stretching every dollar to make this trip happen for Chloe because she needs it. You're 26. You live here rent-free. Staying behind to mind the house and the dog is how you pay your way. It's a fair trade. I work 40 hours a week at the library, I reminded him. I pay for my own gas. I do all the grocery shopping. I haven't been on a vacation since Mom died. The mention of my mother usually ended the conversation. It was the ultimate trump card. Since the cancer took her 4 years ago, my father had positioned himself as the grieving widower just trying to keep the remains of his family together. He had taken control of everything, the house, the savings, and the trust fund my mother had supposedly set up for both of us. Whenever I asked about it, he told me the medical bills had swallowed it whole. He said we were lucky to still have a roof over our heads. Your mother would want your sister to be happy, he said, his voice hardening. Don't be small, Alina. It doesn't suit you. Chloe didn't even look up. She was already texting her personal trainer, complaining that 18 days away from the gym would ruin her progress. She didn't thank me for staying. She didn't acknowledge that I'd be spending my evenings scrubbing the floors and eating generic brand rice while she had dinner with the captain. I felt a pair of eyes on me. At the end of the table sat Uncle Dave, my godfather. He was my mother's older brother, a man who smelled like cedarwood and old paper. He'd come over for breakfast to see them off, but he'd been uncharacteristically quiet. He was a forensic accountant by trade, a man who lived in the narrow margins of truth where numbers don't lie. I watched his brow furrow as he looked at the $25 card, then at my father's expensive leather cruise documents, then back at me. It was a slow, heavy realization. For years, I'd played the role of the grateful daughter, hiding the bruises on my bank account and the exhaustion in my bones. I didn't want him to worry. I didn't want to break the peace my father demanded. But today, the math was too ugly to ignore. My father stood up. "Come on, Chloe, the car is here. Elena, don't forget to set the alarm every night. And for heaven's sake, don't let the plants in the sunroom die again." They left in a whirlwind of expensive luggage and perfume. The front door heavy-thumped shut, leaving the house suddenly, deafeningly quiet. I stayed at the table. I reached out and picked up the grocery card. My thumb traced the raised numbers, $25. It was an insult disguised as a gesture. Uncle Dave didn't leave. He stood up and began clearing the plates. He didn't ask if I needed help, he just stepped into the rhythm of the kitchen. We stood side by side at the sink in a comfortable, heavy silence. I washed, he dried. It was the first time in months I felt like a human being in my own home, rather than a piece of the furniture. As he placed the last dried glass in the cupboard, he turned to me. He leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. "Elena," he said softly. "I'm fine, Uncle Dave, I'll make it work. I always do." He reached out and took the $25 card from the counter where I'd dropped it. He looked at it for a long second, then looked me straight in the eyes. "How long," he asked, his voice low and dangerous, "has he been accessing your mother's accounts?" My heart skipped a beat. "He said they were empty. He said the hospital took everything." Uncle Dave's jaw tightened. He didn't look like my kindly uncle anymore. He looked like the man who found the money people tried to hide. "I handled your mother's estate for the first 6 months," he said. "The hospital bills were covered by insurance. There was a separate trust, Elena, a significant one." He dried his hands on the towel, his movements slow and deliberate. "I've been watching the way he treats you. I've been watching Chloe's lifestyle, and I've been waiting for the right moment to ask you if you're ready to see the truth." He looked toward the front door, then back at me. "He's going to be in the middle of the Atlantic for nearly 3 weeks, Dave said. "That's plenty of time for me to pull the rest of the records." I looked at the empty seat at the head of the table. I thought about the 18 days of rice and silence ahead of me. Something in me, the part of me that had been shrinking for years, suddenly stopped. "What do we do first?" I asked. The house felt like a tomb the moment the taxi pulled away with them. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the $25 grocery card on the counter. It was a piece of plastic that weighed 1,000 pounds. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange, hollow clicking in my chest, like a gear finally snapping into place. I had spent 26 years trying to be the good daughter, the one who smoothed the tablecloth and checked the tire pressure on everyone else's car. I was the bridge they walked over to get to the things they wanted. Uncle Dave didn't push me. He just watched me. He knew the family law better than anyone. He'd watched my father apply it to my mother for 20 years before she died. "I'm going to explain something to you, Elena," Dave said, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. "And I need you to listen with your head, not your heart. Your mother's trust wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. She knew your father's tight money narrative was his favorite tool of control. She didn't want you living on scraps while you waited for a life to start." "He said the probate was a mess," I whispered. "He said the lawyers took most of it, and the rest went to the house mortgage." Dave pulled a small, worn leather notebook from his pocket. He flipped it open. The mortgage was paid off in 2019. I have the bank release right here. And your mother's trust, it was never dry. It was being fed by a life insurance policy and her family's land dividends. It was supposed to pay out to you in quarterly installments starting on your 25th birthday. That was 14 months ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. I haven't seen a dime. I've been asking him for help with my car insurance. He told me I was being financially aggressive and that I needed to learn the value of a dollar. He's been paying for Chloe's apartment in the city, Dave said. He's been paying for her trainer, her clothes, and now this cruise. He didn't use the trust to pay medical bills, Alina. He used it as a slush fund for his favorite daughter because he knows Chloe will never challenge him. You're the one he has to keep small, because if you ever get a taste of your own power, his kingdom collapses. The realization didn't feel like a light bulb. It felt like a cold rain. Every time I'd skipped a meal to make sure Barnaby had his medicine, every time I'd worn the same pair of shoes for 3 years while Chloe showed off her designer hauls, my father had been sitting on a mountain of my own money. I need to talk to him, I said, my voice shaking. I have to ask him one more time. I want to give him a chance to tell me the truth before we do anything. Uncle Dave looked at me with a pained kind of pity. He won't, Alina, but if you need to hear the lie one more time to be sure, then hear it, but don't do it over the phone. You wait until he calls you from the ship's Wi-Fi. Let him feel safe first. I couldn't wait. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the halls of the house I supposedly lived in rent-free, looking at the photos on the walls. There was Chloe at her debutante ball. There was Chloe at her graduation. I wasn't in the frames. I was the one who had taken the pictures. 2 days later, the first check-in call came. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a single bowl of plain white rice. The $25 card was sitting next to the bowl, mocking me. My phone buzzed on the wood. Dad calling, I answered. The background noise was a chaos of wind and laughter. Alina, we're just pulling into Nassau, my father shouted. He sounded younger, lighter. The buffet is incredible. Chloe just bought a pair of pearl earrings in the duty-free shop. They look just like your mother S. My stomach turned. That's nice, Dad. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. I was looking through some of Mom's old papers in the attic. I found a reference to a trust executor. I just wanted to see the ledger, just so I understand our situation better. The silence on the other end was instant. The wind was still there, the laughter was still there, but my father had gone icy. What are you doing in the attic, Alina? I was just looking for. I told you the trust was gone, he snapped. His voice was no longer the warm vacationer. It was the man who slid the $25 card across the table. I have spent my life protecting you from the reality of our debts. I have kept a roof over your head and food in your mouth, and this is how you repay me. By snooping like a common thief. I'm not snooping, Dad. I'm 26. I just want to see the numbers. You will see nothing, he hissed. You are an ungrateful, entitled brat. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to keep this family afloat. If you ever, and I mean ever, bring up that money again, you can pack your bags. You want to be a forensic accountant, you can do it from a park bench. Do you understand me? Dad, I'm hanging up now. I'm going to enjoy dinner with my daughter. The one who actually appreciates what I do. Don't call this phone again unless the house is on fire. Click. I sat in the silence of the kitchen. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the first time I realized that my father didn't just love Chloe more, he actively hated me for being the one person who could see through the curtain. I looked at Barnaby, who was watching me with his big, soulful eyes. He let out a soft whine and nudged my hand with his cold nose. I picked up the $25 grocery card and snapped it in half. The plastic jagged against my thumb, drawing a tiny bead of blood. I reached for my phone and dialed Uncle Dave. He said it, I told him, my voice finally steady. He told me if I asked again, I'd be on the street. Good, Dave said. Now we can stop being family. Now we can be litigants. I didn't know yet that my father had already anticipated my rebellion. He hadn't just threatened me, he had already started moving the pieces to make sure that when he got back, I wouldn't have the strength to fight him. He was a man who didn't believe in fair fights. He believed in total erasure. But I hadn't checked my bank account yet. I didn't sleep. By morning, I knew I had to face the reality of my own bank account, so I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cold cup of coffee. I had been using a joint household account for years, the one where I deposited my library paychecks and my father supposedly contributed bill money. It was the account that kept the lights on, the water running, and Barnaby's heart medication in the cabinet. When the screen loaded, I didn't see numbers. I saw a ghost. The balance was $0.00. I refreshed the page, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrolled down to the transaction history. There it was, processed at 4:14 a.m., right before my father's flight took off. A single transfer. The entire balance, every cent of my last 2 paychecks, every dollar I'd saved for the property taxes, had been moved to an external account. My father hadn't just left me with a $25 grocery card. He had stripped the ship before he jumped overboard. I felt a cold sweat break across my hairline. This wasn't just a tight money situation. This was a calculated strike. He knew I'd asked about the trust. He knew I was starting to look at the foundations of the house, so he decided to burn the stairs behind him. I walked over to the kitchen island, my legs feeling like they were made of water. That's when I saw it. A neon yellow sticky note pressed onto the marble counter, right where the coffee maker sat. In his precise, architectural script, he had written, "Since you want to be independent and play at being an auditor, figure it out. We'll discuss your rent when I return. Don't touch the sunroom thermostat." He had drained my life savings to punish me for asking a question, and then he'd had the gall to leave a chore list. I picked up the sticky note. My hand was shaking so hard the paper rattled. He wanted me to feel the weight of his hand even when he was thousands of miles away. He wanted me to spend 18 days hungry and cold so that when he walked back through that door, I would be grateful for the scraps he threw me. I went to the fridge, I opened it. A carton of eggs with 2 left, a jar of pickles, a bag of wilted spinach. I looked at Barnaby's food bin, 2 days of kibble left, maybe 3 if I stretched it. I sat on the floor, the yellow sticky note crushed in my fist. I thought about my mother. I thought about the way she used to tuck a $20 bill into my shoe before I went to school, whispering, "Just in case, Alina. A woman should always have a way home." My father had taken the $20. He'd taken the shoe. He'd taken the home. My phone chimed with a notification. It was an Instagram alert. Chloe had posted. I tapped it. It was a photo of her in a white bikini lounging on a teak deck chair. In her hand was a tall, frosted glass with a pink umbrella and a wedge of pineapple. The caption read, "First round of Blue Hawaiians. $30 cocktails taste better when daddy's paying. Living my best life. Clinking glasses cruise life blessed family first, $30. Her drink cost $5 more than the card he gave me to live on for 3 weeks. Her drink was paid for with the money I'd earned shelving books and filing archives until my back ached. She was literally drinking my electricity. She was sipping on Barnaby's heart medicine. I felt a surge of nausea. The family law was simple. Chloe was the consumer, and I was the fuel. I was the coal they threw into the furnace to keep the lights bright in her world. I stood up and went to the window. The sky was a bruised purple, the kind that promised a hard frost. The heating oil was low. I could smell the faint, metallic scent of the furnace struggling in the basement. I looked at the yellow sticky note again. "Figure it out." "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty, freezing kitchen. "I'll figure it out." I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing me beg for my own money back. Instead, I grabbed my coat and my mother's old leather work bag. I had one thing he didn't count on. I had the keys to the library, and I had the cell phone number of the one man who knew where the bodies were buried. I called Uncle Dave as I walked out to my car, the engine groaning in the cold. "He drained the account, Dave," I said, my voice cracking once before I smoothed it out. "Everything. I have $0 and a dog who needs meds." "I expected as much," Dave said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "He's a cornered animal, Elena. He's trying to starve you into submission. Do you have enough gas to get to my office?" "I have a quarter tank." "Get here, and Elena, bring your mother's jewelry box, the one with the false bottom. I think it's time we look at the original deed to that house." I put the car in reverse, my eyes blurring for just a second. I hadn't checked the mail yet, but I saw a white envelope stuck in the storm door, a final notice from the utility company. He hadn't just left. He had set a timer. I didn't go to the library. I couldn't. By the time I reached the end of our driveway, the fuel light was glowing a steady, mocking amber. The house was already cooling down, the silence inside it feeling heavy and jagged. I turned the car around, parked it in the exact same spot, and walked back through the front door. I was trapped. I spent the next 3 days in a house that felt like it was slowly exhaling its last bit of warmth. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't touch the thermostat. I wore my mother's heaviest wool coat and 3 pairs of socks, moving through the rooms like a ghost in a museum. My meals were calculated down to the grain: 2 tablespoons of rice, 1 egg, a cup of tap water. On the second night, the power flickered and died. My father hadn't just drained the account, he had ignored the past due notices I hadn't even known existed. The refrigerator stopped humming. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat on the kitchen floor in the dark, my breath visible in the air. I held that $25 grocery card in my hand, the plastic edges digging into my palm. This was the bottom. This was the version of me my father wanted, shivering, starving, and broken, waiting for him to return so he could rescue me from the disaster he had created. I had spent my entire adult life shrinking. I had stayed in this house, worked a low-paying job, and accepted his crumbs because I thought it was what my mother would have wanted. I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping a family. But standing in the dark, I realized that a family doesn't freeze its own members to keep the favored child warm. I leaned my head against the cold cabinets and closed my eyes. I felt a weight on my knee. Barnaby. He didn't care that the house was freezing or that the lights were out. He nudged my hand with his wet nose, a soft, insistent whine in his throat. I reached out and buried my fingers in his thick fur. He was warm, he was alive. He was the only thing in this 3,000-square-foot tomb that actually loved me. "I'm sorry, buddy," I whispered. "I'm going to fix it, I promise." He licked my hand, his tail thumping once against the linoleum. That small, rhythmic sound was the first real thing I'd felt in days. It was a reminder that I wasn't just a resource or a beast of burden. I was the one who kept him alive, and I was the only one who could save myself. A sharp, heavy knock echoed through the house. I flinched, my heart racing. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the front door. Through the frosted glass, I saw a tall, familiar silhouette. I opened the door to a blast of freezing night air. Uncle Dave was standing there. He wasn't wearing his usual soft sweater. He was in a dark overcoat, his face set in a grim, professional mask I'd only seen in his office photos. In his arms, he was clutching a massive, black leather binder, bursting with tabs and sticky notes. "I tried to call," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The line is dead." "The power's out, too," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. Dave looked around the dark foyer, then back at me. He saw the coat, the socks, and the hollow look in my eyes. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder, a firm, grounding pressure. He went too far, Alina. He thought he could starve the truth out of you. He held up the heavy binder. But I spent the last 48 hours at the county records office and the bank's regional branch. I didn't need him to sign anything. I just needed him to be out of the country long enough for the red flags to trigger a manual audit. He walked into the kitchen, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. He set the binder down on the oak table, the same table where my father had slid me that $25 card. I needed him out of the country to finish this, Dave said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. And now that he is, he's never coming back to this house as an owner. The cold of the house had settled into the furniture by the time morning came. I had spent the night in a chair by the kitchen window, watching the frost creep across the glass like a slow-motion invasion. I only had $2 left in my coat pocket, but I knew I couldn't stay in the dark anymore. I had to go into town. I had to use the one thing I had left, the $25 grocery card my father had handed me. I didn't know yet that the damage had already gone public. I pulled into the parking lot of the local grocer, the engine of my car sounding like it was coughing through a throat full of gravel. As I stepped out, I saw Mrs. Gable, our neighbor from 3 doors down, loading bags into her trunk. She'd known me since I was in diapers. She was the woman who used to bring me ginger snaps when I fell off my bike. "Alina," she said, her voice lacking its usual warmth. She didn't move toward me. She stayed behind her open trunk, using it like a barricade. "I saw your father and Chloe off the other day. Quite the trip." "It is," I said, trying to force a polite smile through my shivering. "It's very quiet at the house." Mrs. Gable clicked her tongue, a sharp, rhythmic sound of disapproval. "I'm sure it is. Your father told us at the garden club how hard it's been for him lately. He said you were too lazy to travel, even when he offered to pay. He told us it's a shame you make him support you at your age, but I suppose some children just never want to leave the nest, do they?" The air felt thinner. "He said that." "He said he was worried about leaving you alone with the bills," she added, her eyes narrowing. "Said you have a habit of forgetting where the money goes. It's a heavy burden for a widower, Alina." She slammed her trunk shut and got into her car without saying goodbye. I stood in the parking lot, the exhaust from her car swirling around my ankles. The lie was already in the groundwater. He hadn't just drained my bank account, he'd pre-poisoned the well so that if I went to the neighbors for help, I'd look like the predator he'd made me out to be. I walked into the grocery store, my head down. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a voicemail from the local vet. "Hi, Alina. This is Sarah from Dr. Miller's office. I'm calling to cancel Barnaby's heart checkup for Thursday. Your father called from the ship and told us he's revoked your authorization on the account. He mentioned you might try to charge unnecessary things while he's away and said we aren't to perform any services unless he speaks to us personally. Give us a call when he's back." I almost dropped the phone. He was reaching back across the ocean to choke the life out of my dog's care. I reached the checkout counter with a bag of rice, a carton of eggs, and a small bag of the cheapest dog food they had. I felt the weight of eyes on me. The cashier was Brenda. She'd been a bridesmaid at my mother's wedding. She'd sat at our Thanksgiving table, but today she didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the library. She scanned the rice with a tight, pitying expression. "Big cruise for the favorites, huh?" she asked. Her tone was like a needle. "I'm staying with the dog, Brenda," I said quietly. "So I heard." She stopped scanning and leaned over the counter, her voice dropping so the manager, who was watching from the cigarette kiosk, could hear. "Your dad came in here the morning they left. He told us you threw a massive tantrum, Alina. Said you demanded the house to yourself for 3 weeks and told him you wouldn't do a lick of work while he was gone. He said it was so exhausting dealing with your entitlement that he almost stayed behind." The manager nodded solemnly from the kiosk. Brenda sighed, sliding the eggs across the scanner. It's so generous of him to still cover your groceries after the way you treated him. He left a note with the manager saying we should only let you use that one card. Said he didn't want you running up his credit out of spite. The room felt like it was tilting. The posture of the people in the store had shifted. The way Brenda held the bag, the way the manager stared, it was a map of my new social reality. I wasn't the daughter who stayed behind to help. I was the parasite who had been generously tolerated. My father had built a fortress of lies, and I was standing outside it in the cold. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I knew that in this town, my father's word was currency and I was bankrupt. I slid the $25 card through the reader. It felt like sliding my dignity through a shredder. I walked out to my car, my hands numb, and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for the library. I was supposed to be at work in an hour. But I knew if I went there, the whispers would already be waiting in the stacks. I texted Uncle Dave instead. He told everyone I'm stealing from him. He told the vet I can't be trusted with the dog. He's turning the whole town against me before he even gets back. His reply came 10 seconds later. Let him talk. Lies are loud, but deeds are permanent. Meet me at the courthouse at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Bring the binder. I looked at the bag of cheap dog food on the passenger seat. I thought about the steak Chloe was probably eating right now. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going to the library. I didn't know yet that the email was already sent, but I knew I was done being the soil. I didn't sleep. By morning, I knew I had to face the cold again, so I put on 3 layers of shirts and my mother's old wool coat to meet Uncle Dave at the courthouse. The heavy binder sat on the passenger seat like a live bomb. We sat in a small, windowless consultation room on the 3rd floor of the county building. The air smelled of floor wax and old paper. Uncle Dave didn't waste time with comforting platitudes. He opened the binder and began sliding documents across the laminate table. He didn't just spend the money, Alina, Dave said. His voice was hard, professional. He forged your signature on the trust disbursement waivers for 14 months, and he did something even more dangerous. He took out a home equity line of credit in your name, claiming you were a co-owner of the property, but he forgot one very important detail. Dave pulled out a yellowed, original deed. Your mother didn't leave this house to him. She left it to you in a life estate. He only had the right to live here as long as he remained a widower and maintained the property. The moment he used the house as collateral for a private loan to fund Chloe's lifestyle, he violated the terms of the deed. He slid a copy of my mother's real will across the table. I saw her signature, that elegant, looping M, and felt a sudden, sharp ache in my chest. She didn't leave you with nothing, Dave whispered. She left you everything. She knew him, Alina. She knew exactly what he would try to do. I looked at the document. It was all there. The house, the secondary accounts, the land dividends. My father had been living in a house he didn't own, spending money that wasn't his, while making me feel like a charity case in my own childhood bedroom. Ally activation. Dave reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of fresh, legal-sized papers. I've been working with a colleague in estate law. Since he's out of the country, he can't contest an emergency injunction for elder or dependent financial abuse. And since you're the primary heir being defrauded, we have standing. The judge just signed it. Every account associated with his social security number is frozen as of 10 minutes ago. His credit cards will decline the next time he tries to buy a bottle of wine on that ship. I felt a dizzying rush of vertigo. What about the house? The locks, Dave said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, brass set of new house keys. They were cold and solid in my hand. The injunction gives you sole possession of the property pending a full forensic audit. He has no legal right to enter that front door. I've already called a locksmith. They're meeting us at the house in an hour. Warmth beat. Dave saw my hands shaking. He stopped talking about law and stood up. He walked around the table and didn't just pat my shoulder, he pulled me into a hug. He smelled like the cedarwood and peppermint tea my mother used to make. "You're not a servant, Alina," he said into my hair. "And you're not a burden, you're her daughter. And today we're bringing her home." I leaned into him for just a second, letting the weight of the last 4 years finally crack. I wasn't alone. I had a witness. I had a way out. "They dock in 3 days," I said, pulling back and wiping my eyes. "I know," Dave said. "And when they do, they're going to find out that the beast of burden finally put the plow down." I stood up, gripping the new keys until they bit into my palm. I thought about the $25 card. I thought about the empty dog food bin. I thought about the way the grocery store manager looked at me. "Let's go," I said. "I have some bags to pack, but they aren't mine." But I hadn't checked my phone yet. As we walked toward the courthouse exit, it buzzed with a series of frantic notifications from a group chat I'd been removed from months ago. I didn't reply to Chloe's text. I watched the 3 dots of her typing bubble dance on the screen, appearing and disappearing like her conscience, before I shoved the phone back into my pocket. "She's realizing the spa is closed," I said as we stepped into the sharp morning air outside the courthouse. "Dad, too. If their shipboard accounts were linked to the primary trust fund, they're currently sailing on a very expensive floating brick." "Let them panic," Uncle Dave said. "Panic makes people sloppy. But we need to move fast. An emergency injunction is a shield, Alina, not a fortress. We have 72 hours before their ship docks and he can get to a landline with a lawyer." We drove back to the house, my house, in separate cars. The drive felt different this time. The trees weren't just scenery, they were part of the estate. The cracked pavement of the driveway wasn't a chore I had to nag my father to fix. It was a line of my mother's legacy that had been neglected. When I pulled in, a white van was already parked near the garage. The locksmith, a man named Gary who had gone to high school with my father, was leaning against his door, chewing on a toothpick. He looked at me, then at the house, then back at me. I could see the gossip from the grocery store playing behind his eyes. "Heard your dad was out at sea," Gary said, his voice cautious. "He know you're changing these." "Gary," Uncle Dave said, stepping out of his car and flashing a copy of the court order. "This is a legal possession transfer. You're here to secure the property for the owner. That would be Alina." Gary's eyebrows shot up. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, and his posture shifted. The pity was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp professional respect. "All right then, let's get to work." The sound of the power drill against the front door was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Work-lack, work-lack. One by one, the old brass locks, the ones my father had used to keep me in my place, fell onto the porch. While Gary worked, Dave and I headed to the basement. I needed to confirm the leverage was real. In the back corner, behind a stack of Chloe's old sorority crates, sat my father's private filing cabinet. He'd told me for years it was just tax returns and boring insurance papers. He'd kept it locked with a heavy-duty padlock. Gary came down 5 minutes later and snapped the padlock in seconds. Inside, it wasn't just tax returns. It was a roadmap of a 14-year heist. There were ledgers for accounts I didn't recognize. There were loan agreements between my father and Chloe for educational expenses that looked suspiciously like the exact amounts for her European backpacking trip and her car down payment. But at the very bottom, in a blue accordion folder, I found the killing blow. It was a series of correspondence with a real estate developer from 3 months ago. My father had been negotiating the sale of the sunroom lot, the piece of land my mother had specifically designated as a protected garden in her will, to be turned into a luxury duplex. He was planning to sell the land out from under me and use the proceeds to buy a retirement condo in Florida for him and Chloe. He wasn't just spending your money, Alina, Dave said, looking over my shoulder at the developer's letter. He was planning to leave you with a pile of bags on the sidewalk and no legal recourse once the land was sold. If they'd made it back from this cruise without us doing this, the contracts would have been signed by the end of the month. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I wasn't being reactive anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist. Dave, I said, my voice sounding like someone else's, someone stronger. Can we find out which developer this is? And can we find out if they've already paid him a deposit? Why? Because if he took a deposit for land he doesn't legally own, that's not just a civil matter, I said. That's wire fraud. I walked upstairs. The house felt warmer already. The locksmith had finished. I took the new brass keys and felt their weight. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I didn't answer. I just watched the screen. It was my father. He'd finally found a way to call through the ship's satellite. I let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the transcription popped up. Alina, answer this phone right now. My cards are being declined at the purser's desk. They're threatening to restrict our cabin access. I don't know what kind of game you're playing with Dave, but I will ruin you for this. Answer me. I deleted the message. I didn't need to answer. The countdown had already started, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being hunted. I looked at the black garbage bags Gary had left in his van. I bought 10 boxes of them. The final 48 hours felt like the slow, heavy pull of a tide before a storm. I didn't spend them pacing. I spent them moving. I dragged the heavy black garbage bags from the garage into the center of the living room. Every time I folded one of my father's silk shirts or swept Chloe's designer shoes into a heap, I felt a layer of old, suffocating skin peeling off my back. I wasn't being careful. I wasn't being the dependable one. I was an eviction notice in human form. I moved their things with a mechanical, quiet efficiency. I didn't touch their memories. The few photos of my mother stayed on the walls, but everything else, the physical evidence of their occupation, went into the bags. I stacked them on the edge of the driveway, right where the headlights of a pulling-in car would hit them. I wanted the first thing they saw to be the end of their era. My father was still trying to reach me. He'd given up on the ship's satellite phone and moved to email, his messages becoming a frantic loop of ego and desperation. Alina, the purser has confined us to the cabin area because our bill is unpaid. They think I'm a fraud. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Chloe? She hasn't stopped crying for 6 hours. You've had your little tantrum. Now call Dave and tell him to release the hold immediately, or I will file charges for theft the moment I hit the pier. I read it while sitting on the porch, wrapped in my mother's old cardigan. I didn't feel the old sting of guilt. I just looked at the words, they think I'm a fraud, and thought, finally, the world is catching up to the truth. The next morning, the social contraction began in earnest. I was standing in the driveway when a black SUV pulled up. It was Mr. Henderson, the developer I'd seen in my father's secret files. He rolled down his window, looking confused and more than a little annoyed. Alina. Is your father around? I've been trying to reach him about the sunroom lot. He was supposed to sign the final site plan yesterday. He's at sea, Mr. Henderson, I said, walking toward the car. I didn't wait for him to ask more. I handed him a copy of the emergency injunction and the original deed. But you should know that my father doesn't own this land. He never did. He was attempting to sell property that belongs to my mother's estate, of which I am the sole trustee. Any deposit you paid him is currently frozen in his personal account. Henderson's face went from annoyed to a sickly shade of gray. He grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. He took $50,000 as a good faith deposit, Alina. He told me the probate was closed. He lied, I said simply. I'd suggest you call your lawyer and the county sheriff. I'm sure they'll want to add your statement to the forensic audit. He didn't even say goodbye. He reversed out of the driveway so fast he clipped a trash can. That was the second person. The lie was collapsing, and the weight of it was starting to crush the people who had built it. By evening, the house was a hollow shell of itself. I'd moved all the bags to the edge of the lawn. Barnaby was lying on the porch, his head on his paws, watching the street. He looked calmer than I'd seen him in years. No more shouting, no more tension, no more being shoved aside so Chloe could have the good spot on the rug. Uncle Dave pulled up at sunset. He didn't come inside. He just stood by his car, looking at the mountain of black bags. "The sheriff's deputy is briefed," Dave said. "They'll be stationed at the end of the block starting at 6:00 a.m. They'll wait for my signal. How are you holding up?" "I'm not the one who has to explain $50,000 of missing developer money," I said. "No," Dave smiled thinly. "You're just the girl who stayed home with the dog." I looked at the house. The lights were back on. I depaid the bill with a small emergency loan from Dave that I'd already calculated how to repay. The sunroom, the one my father wanted to bulldoze for a duplex, was glowing gold in the twilight. I went inside and made one final preparation. I took the $25 grocery card, the one I'd snapped in half, and the neon yellow sticky note that said "Figure it out." I didn't throw them away. I taped them to the inside of the front door, right at eye level. I wanted to see them one last time before I opened the door for the final act. The air was turning sharp and cold. I went to the kitchen and pulled out 2 steaks I'd bought with the last of my own library paycheck. I seasoned them slowly. "Tomorrow, Barnaby," I whispered. "Tomorrow we eat like kings." I didn't sleep that night either. But for the first time, it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because I didn't want to miss a single second of the silence. But I hadn't checked the port schedule yet. At 4:00 a.m., a text came through from an unknown number. It was the town car service my father always used. "Estimated arrival at residence, 7:15 a.m. Please ensure the driveway is clear for luggage unloading." I stood up, put on my mother's sweater, and walked out to the porch. The black town car didn't just pull up. It glided into the driveway with a quiet, expensive hum that felt like an insult to the freezing air. It was 7:15 a.m. The sun was a pale, weak disk behind the gray clouds, and my breath was coming out in short, sharp plumes. I didn't move from my chair on the porch. Barnaby sat at my feet, his ears forward, a low rumble starting in his chest. Beside me sat Uncle Dave, his hands wrapped around a thermos, and Mr. Miller, a process server Dave had hired to ensure every movement was documented. The driver got out first. He looked at the mountain of black garbage bags lining the driveway, 62 bags in total, stacked like a funeral pyre for my father's ego. He hesitated, his hand on the trunk latch. Then the rear door opened. My father stepped out first. He was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat I'd never seen before, likely bought with the mental health funds he'd stolen from my mother's account. He looked tanned, rested, and absolutely livid. Chloe followed him, her face puffy and red behind oversized sunglasses, clutching a designer shopping bag like a shield. My father didn't see me at first. He saw the bags. He saw the black plastic mountain where his life used to be. He marched toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel. "What is this?" he roared, his voice cracking the morning silence. "What have you done?" He reached the front steps and jammed his key into the deadbolt. He twisted it once, twice, his knuckles turning white. It didn't budge. He began to rattle the knob violently, kicking the base of the door. "Elena, open this door. I know you're in there, you pathetic little thief." I stood up slowly. I walked to the edge of the porch railing. "The locks have been changed, Dad, and the security system. You don't have a code anymore." He froze. He looked up at me, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You've lost your mind. I am the owner of this house. I am your father. You open this door right now, or I will have the police drag you out in handcuffs. Actually, Mr. Miller said, stepping forward and handing a thick envelope over the railing. The police are already on their way, Mr. Sterling, but they aren't coming for her. My father snatched the envelope, ripping it open. Chloe moved up behind him, peering over his shoulder. I watched the exact moment the color left his face. It didn't fade, it vanished, leaving him a sickly, parchment gray. "This is an emergency injunction," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Asset freeze, on what grounds? This is my money, I earned this." "You didn't earn $50,000 from a developer for land you don't own," Uncle Dave said, stepping into the light. "And you certainly didn't earn the 14 months of trust disbursements you forged Alina's name on, Greg." "Dave," my father's eyes went wide. You did this, you betrayed me for her." "I didn't betray anyone," Dave said coldly. "I finally started honoring my sister's will, something you should have tried 4 years ago." Just then, a second car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the police. It was Aunt Carol, my father's sister, the one who had always looked down her nose at me for being the difficult daughter. She had come to welcome them home, carrying a welcome-back gift basket tied with a giant yellow ribbon. She stopped the car and climbed out, staring at the garbage bags and the standoff on the porch. "Greg." "What's going on? Why is all your clothes in the driveway?" "Carol, thank God," Chloe wailed, running toward her aunt. "Alina S. had some kind of breakdown. She's locked us out. She has stolen Dad's bank accounts." Aunt Carol looked up at me, her expression hardening. "Alina, really, this is a new low, even for you. Your father just spent thousands of dollars to give your sister a bit of peace, and you do this. Give him the keys." "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice projecting across the lawn. "Ask him about the $50,000 he took from the Hendersons. Ask him why the sheriff is on his way to discuss wire fraud and felony embezzlement of a protected estate." Carol looked at my father. "Greg, what is she talking about? You told me the trust was settled years ago. You told me you were supporting her out of the goodness of your heart." The sheriff's cruiser turned the corner then, its blue and red lights silent but blinding in the gray morning. The deputy, a man who had known my father for 20 years, stepped out. He didn't offer a handshake. He kept his hand near his belt. "Mr. Sterling," the deputy said, "I have a court-ordered eviction and a warrant for a forensic search of the premises. You need to step away from the door." "I am the owner," my father screamed, his composure finally shattering. He pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. "It wasn't just me. I did it for her. She needed the money. She was the one who wanted the cruise. I was just trying to be a good father." Chloe recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "What? You told me you earned that money. You told me the trust was dry because Alina was expensive. You lied to me too." "I lied to keep you happy," he shrieked. "I spent every cent on you. Every dress, every flight, it was all for you." The room, the entire neighborhood, was watching. Neighbors had come out onto their porches. The town car driver was leaning against his hood, recording the whole thing on his phone. Aunt Carol looked at the gift basket in her hand, then looked at my father's twisted, screaming face. She dropped the basket. The glass jars of jam shattered on the pavement, the yellow ribbons soaking up the red juice like blood. "You told me she was the greedy one," Carol said, her voice dripping with a disgust I'd never heard from her. "You told me she was the one bleeding you dry." She didn't wait for an answer. She got back into her SUV, backed over one of the garbage bags of Chloe's shoes, and drove away without looking back. The deputy stepped up the stairs. "Mr. Sterling, take your bags and walk, or you're leaving in the back of my car, your choice." My father looked at the house. He looked at the new locks. Then he looked at me. For the first time in my life, he looked small. He looked like a man who had finally run out of other people's lives to burn. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but there was no power in it. "I already do," I said. "I regret waiting this long." I watched from the porch as the man who had controlled my every breath for 26 years began dragging heavy black bags across his own driveway, humiliated in front of the entire town. Chloe followed him, sobbing, her designer heels sinking into the mud of the lawn he'd never let me play on. The silence that followed the town car's departure was absolute. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the tail lights vanish around the bend. The street was empty now, save for a few neighbors who quickly retreated inside, their curiosity satisfied by the spectacle. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I didn't feel like a hero in a movie. I just felt a quiet, steady warmth returning to my limbs, the kind you feel when a fever finally breaks. Uncle Dave stayed to help me drag the garbage bags back to the curb for a special bulk pickup he'd arranged. He didn't offer advice or a lecture. He just worked. We moved the 62 bags of cashmere, designer leather, and stolen comfort to the edge of the property line. By the time we were finished, the sun was high enough to melt the frost off the sunroom glass. The practical fallout was swift. Within 48 hours, the local bank confirmed that the forensic audit had flagged 3 years of unauthorized transfers. My father and Chloe didn't go to jail, not yet, but the civil injunction was ironclad. They were forced to move into a 40-year-old apartment complex on the edge of the next county, a place with beige carpets and thin walls. Chloe stopped posting on Instagram. Her best life didn't look so blessed when it was lived in a studio apartment without a personal trainer or a trust fund to buy $30 cocktails. The last I heard, she was working at a mall kiosk, selling phone cases and refusing to take our father's calls. Without my mother's money to bind them, their closeness evaporated like mist. The town shifted, too. A week later, I walked into the local grocer. Brenda was behind the register. She didn't look at me with pity this time, she looked at the floor. "Elena," she mumbled as she scanned my milk. I'm sorry, we didn't know. Your dad, he has a way of making things sound so certain." "It's okay, Brenda," I said, and I meant it. I didn't need her apology to know who I was. I just paid for my groceries with a card that had my name on it, my name and my own money. I used the first disbursement from the recovered trust to fix the furnace and the roof. I didn't buy a luxury cruise. I didn't buy a designer wrap dress. I bought a new water heater and a year's supply of Barnaby's heart medication. The house is smaller now that they're gone. Quieter. But for the first time since my mother died, it feels like a home instead of a headquarters for someone else's ego. I still work at the library. I still drive my old car. My life is quieter, humbler, and entirely mine. Yesterday evening, Uncle Dave came over. We didn't sit in the dining room with the oak table. We sat on the back porch with 2 plates of steak and a bowl of fresh greens from the garden I'm finally replanting. Barnaby was asleep at my feet, his snoring the only sound in the twilight. "She'd be proud of you, Elena," Dave said, nodding toward the sunroom. "I think she already was," I said. "She just knew I had to find the keys myself." Before I went back inside, I stopped at the front door. I looked at the small, cheap frame I'd hung next to the light switch. Inside, it was the snapped $25 grocery card and the yellow sticky note that said "Figure it out." I don't look at them with anger anymore. I look at them as the receipts for my freedom. Every time I leave the house, I touch the frame. It reminds me that I'm no longer the soil. I'm the one who decides what grows here. If it were you, and you saw your father standing on that porch with nowhere to go, would you have let them inside for one last night to gather their things, or would you have kept the door locked? There's a story in the description about a mother who tried to cancel her daughter's wedding behind her back. Trust me, you'll want to hear that one too.